Welcome, friends, to the Halftime Alumni Webinars. I'm your host, Doug Piper, and I'm Halftime Carolina's Alumni Director. But more importantly, I hope you'll join me in this webinar series as we explore our halftime journeys together. Each webinar is designed to help you on your halftime journey through the actual stories of other alumni and them sharing their experiences. We're going to move into the webinar momentarily, but there are a few logistical items I'd like to go through before we move into LeAnn's story. First, our next webinar will be with Lloyd Reed, and he's going to be discussing your second half tribe, the people you need around you to finish well. I know this is going to be interesting, and I have enjoyed all of Lloyd's webinars. But this next one is going to be on Thursday, August 15th at 9:30 a.m. Now, that time may not work for everyone, and I understand that, but if you just go ahead and register, you'll get access to the replays, and the neat thing is you can ask questions whether you're there or not live. We also have a halftime online group, and let me just cover a few of the logistical items that we have here on this Crowdcast interface that we use. There is an Ask a Question button roughly in the center of your screen. Hopefully I'm getting close to where I'm pointing to it. Please utilize that to ask questions that LeAnn will try and answer as best she can towards the end of the webinar. You submit them there in writing, and we will get those. And if you look at the questions, you don't know that you want to ask one, you can vote yours up. And so we make sure we get to the most important questions. There's also a chat screen, I think, over here. And I would encourage you to use that chat screen. That's a way just to kind of share with the audience, maybe where you're from, where you are on your halftime journey. We're not really following those real carefully, so don't put your questions there. But I hope you'll kind of share with one another. Networking is one of the things I keep hearing people want in halftime, and they want to network with other halftimers, and that's a great place to do that. Now, the internet is always not perfect, and hopefully today's will go perfectly, but if it's not playing correctly for you, just refresh your browser window. That corrects most issues. Try and use the Chrome browser. The Chrome browser is the most stable for these webinars. If you can't hear, double check that you're unmuted or turn up your speakers. And lastly, if we have a technical issue and have to restart the webinar, and unfortunately it does happen sometimes, I'll send out an email to everyone that's registered and let them know the new link, and we will always resume if at all possible. Everyone that registers will get an email with a link to the recording, any resources that LeAnn mentions, and also links to the Facebook group. So with all that behind us, let's move into our conversation with Dr. LeAnn Kridelbaugh. LeAnn transitioned from her role as President and Chief Medical Officer in a network of Dallas pediatric practices to an entirely new leadership role. But this time, it was at a federally qualified health center in a new city and with one of the largest concentrations of refugees in the entire United States. So please grab your journals and get ready to take notes as we bring on our newest friend, Dr. LeAnn Kridelbaugh of Kansas City, Missouri. And she's going to talk about finding your mission field. So LeAnn, welcome to our program.
Thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be a part of this and look forward to having a conversation.
Well, LeAnn, I've heard so much about the impact you're currently having on our refugee population. However, I know it didn't start there. So can you briefly share a little of what life was like prior to your ministry and how you actually got involved with halftime?
Well, so I was, I'm sorry, my screen just flipped over and freaked me out a little bit. Technology is wonderful.
Yeah,
so anyway, so I was, had been in Dallas for 30 years and have always wanted to work with underserved populations. So I'm a pediatrician by training. The first 8 years of my career, I was just doing general practice, but began to do some leadership development and was leader of a small group of 7 pediatricians. And then I transitioned to our children's hospital to do some work in the realm of childhood obesity. And after about 4 years, I needed to hand that off to an academic affiliate of the hospital. And so I didn't really know what was next at that point. And the hospital was building a network of primary care practices. And so I said to them, hey, can I fill in with you for a little bit until I figure out what's next? Well, one thing led to another. And instead of filling in, they kept tossing me, oh, would you take this on? Oh, would you take this on? And the next thing I knew, I was the president and chief medical officer of the company. And we had grown it to be a very large network of 20 practices, and we were taking care of over 100,000 children, most of them on Medicaid or underserved.
Wait. 100,000?
100,000 unique children. We were seeing over 250,000 individual visits a year. So it was big. Wow. And it was busy. But we were really doing the work that we had been asked to do, which was keep those children healthy, keep them out of the hospital, take care of them in their communities where they live. And all of that was predicated on the idea that funding was going to shift from being fee for service. So you get paid for every visit, whether it's a runny nose or a more complex visit, to our group of practices being given a pot of money to keep people healthy and out of the hospital. So in that kind of a model, you want to do exactly what we were doing, help take care of them right close to home in the lowest cost environment possible. Well, long story short, the funding stream didn't flip. So we were actually costing our owner money because in the fee for service realm, we were losing money. And they ultimately had to make the decision to sell off our practices. So a year ago, I lost my job. Now, I had seen that coming and had been kind of searching for how am I going to figure out what's next? And so one day, this is a great story about how I connected with Halftime. I was having a really difficult day at work, and I sat down at my computer over the lunch hour, and I thought, I'm going to read the Bible while I eat my lunch. And so I went to Bible Gateway intending to read scripture while I ate lunch. And instead, I saw this ad for Dean Nilwani's new book, and saw this concept of how to go from success to significance. And I went, whoa, I need to know about that. So I clicked on it, started learning about, took me to Halftime, started learning about Halftime. So a few days later, I called Halftime to find out about the Fellows program. And I don't remember who answered the phone, but whoever it was said, I want to let you talk to our director of admissions, Rhonda Kelbeck. And I went, Rhonda Kelbeck? Wait a minute, there can only be one person with that name. And she's been a substitute teacher at my Sunday school class. Like, I know who this is. And
oh my goodness.
Yes. So I'm like, no, this is a God thing, right? This, because you're kind of wondering, is this place legit or, what is Halftime? But then I'm like, well, wait, I know their director of admissions. And then I thought, well, really, could this really be happening? I thought, well, when I talk to her, I'm going to know that voice. Because like, if you know Rhonda, she has a unique voice, right? So the minute she got on the phone, I said, Rhonda, I just have to tell you, like, you remember when you taught the Esther Sunday school class, the lady that leads in singing at the end of it? She said, the doctor? I said, yeah, that's me. And so I was like, I know, and Rhonda's so enthusiastic about Halftime anyway, but that just lend additional credibility. And so I had to do it.
Oh my goodness. Well, Rhonda has impacted so many people. So did you have kind of an aha moment as you got involved with Halftime? Did it lead you to, as you go through the process, did you have one moment that you can say that sort of the light bulb turned on, or it became obvious, or the fog cleared and you really thought you knew what you wanted to do with your new calling?
No, I must say I'm one of those who, my calling morphed a little bit. I tweaked what I was doing a little bit. But what it really did was kind of confirm for me that I was where I needed to be, or, close to where, or doing what I needed to be doing, at least for this season. And so, I remember when we wrote our mission statements during our original launch event, and I felt like I just kind of, I don't know, almost completed an assignment and wasn't really come in. And so I kept coming back to that mission statement. But every time I came back to it, I was like, no, this really, it kind of is right. And it really comes down to, and I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, so may not be able to quote it exactly, but it comes down to that the mission statement is to meet the physical needs of people. And in specific, I put of families in poverty in order to earn the right to share the love of Jesus with them. And it still fits today. And so that's kind of where I am. And so there was no aha moment. It was just reconfirming or affirming that the work that I was doing was likely the work that God was calling me to do.
But I love that. I mean, that's mirrors some other organizations. I know that they say you earn the right to be heard.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because, if you think about it, there's a psychological thought or writer that talked about a hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, And so if you don't have food or you don't have shelter or you can't, you don't have clothing, then, higher level needs are not on your radar. Like your spiritual needs, if you're hungry, you got to meet those needs first. And so, and in the process of me helping to meet those needs in the lives of people, or in my case, leading a group of people that meets those needs, the person isn't going to be at a point where they can hear about spiritual things. So you have to earn their trust and meet their needs, and then you can talk about their spiritual needs.
Well, I love that. So can you share a little bit of maybe some examples of how these opportunities have manifest themselves, and you can see your calling actually all fitting together?
Well, so for me, one of the things that I have focused on as a leader is kind of identifying who are the people among my employees who are men and women of faith, and how can I encourage them and support them in their day-to-day work. I still see patients some myself, and so I certainly try to consciously, on a day when I'm going to go see patients, I pray before I go to see patients and really ask that God will give me opportunities to touch them with his love. And what I really try to, consciously bring Jesus with me into every exam room. One of the things that I had always hoped that God would lead me to is an organization that was a faith-based nonprofit doing healthcare, so that I could really go in and perhaps pray with my patients, or really openly talk about my faith in big ways with them. That's not where God led me. He led me to an organization that's a secular organization. So, unless a patient were to invite me to pray with them, I'm probably not able to bring that up and do it. But I still seek to find small ways in the context of that visit to share my faith. And then to, as I said, encourage my employees who are believers to do the same and model that for them, and try to model what it means to be a Christian leader in a secular organization.
So in a secular organization, it must be kind of a special moment when a patient does ask you to pray with them. Have you seen kind of a different level of their interest at that point in spirituality?
Well, I think, when a patient who is a believer recognizes that there's a person of faith that's helping to to care for them, maybe in a setting where they didn't expect that. I think that there's deep comfort there. Or, if I have an opportunity to put my arm around somebody and say, I'll pray for you. Now, does that happen every day? No. But I try to just embrace it every opportunity that I can.
But when it does happen, how do you leave the room?
Oh, just full of joy. Just full of joy. Yes, absolutely.
Because that was one of your hopes that would happen. Yes,
right, exactly.
Which I think is even more powerful in a secular organization.
Well, it certainly, yes, I agree. It may not be as frequent, but when it happens, it's incredibly powerful. I've read several books on bringing your faith to work, and most of them were written by people who, own the business or have the opportunity to really really integrate their faith deeply into their workspaces. And it's more challenging in an organization like the one I'm with. But that gives me an opportunity to minister to my colleagues as well. I mean, not only do we have a very diverse population that we're taking care of, there's tremendous diversity among the leadership team. I mean, my boss is a Muslim now. So, wow, what opportunities are there just in my interactions, on the administrative floor with my colleagues that are running this health center with me.
Wow, I mean, that's quite a mission field. I mean, that was your title. That's a secular organization. So, do you have any stories where prayer led to something else, and you've seen it go further than you ever would have thought?
Not so much in the organization I'm with currently. Remember, I've only been here 3 months, so this is all very new, and I haven't even seen my first patient here in Missouri yet because I had to get a Missouri license, and the credentialing process for doctors takes several months. And so I can't even go in an exam room with a patient as the doctor right now. But in my previous role, as I was in my halftime cohort, going through the halftime process, and had to announce to my group that the practices were being sold. About half of my doctors were not offered jobs with the new company. There were and none of my doctors or my nurse practitioners were given a choice. They were told, you are going to work for this new company or you're getting a severance package. And of course, I had been with that organization for a long time, and I knew who my believers were and who, so the ability to pray with some people who were, facing a career move that they didn't choose. And that's not easy for physicians. Like, they're used to being in control, in charge, and making their own decisions. Thank you very much. And being told whether they had a job or didn't have a job, and they had no choice in the matter, and helping people walk through that and praying with some people through that. And that was really powerful. And it was because I had learned who my believers were, and I had shared that I was a fellow believer. And we had even developed a prayer chain group that we had it out using our personal emails. So I had a physician who owned that group and could send out prayer requests among the believers in our organization. And so some of that was really powerful as we walked through that really difficult transition time.
Oh, I think that is super powerful. Our round table, my halftime round table, we still do that, and we're a couple of years out of our round table. Mm-hmm. So you found this underserved mission field, and clearly you've made some impact already. But how has this shift in your life from a chief of staff in a Dallas hospital to now serving this underserved population, how has that impacted your friends and family?
Well, so certainly I'm spending most of my time in Kansas City, but my husband is a native Dallasite, and he is kind of struggling with the idea of whether he wants to leave his hometown. He's retired. He's been retired for several years. He's got, his friendships, his lunch buddies. He still has lunch once a month with guys he graduated from high school with. Wow. Many years ago. And so, leaving all of that behind as a retiree and starting over when I'll be going to work every day, like that's a big challenge for him to think through. And yet, I reminded him a couple times, you did marry me, not Dallas. So, it's messy. It's not, we don't have it all figured out yet. And we're still doing a commuter marriage and trying to figure out, am I going to buy a house? I'm living in an apartment. Am I going to buy a house for one person to live in? Am I going to buy a house for two people to live in? And really, and we're still sorting all that out. And of course, I grew up about 2 hours north of here. So I have friends and family there. And, this is another God thing. One of the men in my cohort at halftime lives in Kansas City. When I started looking at where should I position myself in the city, I decided I wanted to be about halfway between work and the airport, because I'm spending a lot of time going to the airport as well as going to work. So I picked an apartment complex and then reached out to Mike Tessman from my cohort and said, hey, is this a good neighborhood? Would this be a good place to live? And he said, well, yeah, we live about 3 blocks from there. So, that was really a God thing as well. Now, we are so busy that I've seen Mike and Michelle exactly twice since I've been here in Kansas City. But I mean, he gave me all their phone numbers of him and his family and said, now, look, if there's a tornado warning, don't you stay in that apartment building. You come up and get in our basement. So, it's just nice to know they're there if I need them.
Well, I love your description of messy. It really doesn't sound like a medical term.
No, it's not medical. And I don't know how it's all going to play out, but I really believe God gave me this job. And I want to quickly tell you how that came about. Because again, I believe God gave me this job. So I was, I was early in my, so I got a year's severance. I had some time to figure this out when I left, when my other job ended. And not too long after that job ended, like September or October, after my job ended in July, I saw a couple of jobs at federally qualified health centers. And that means they get extra money from the federal government to take care of this underserved population. So after my experience losing my job because of lack of funding, I wanted to find some place that had solid funding. So saw a couple of jobs on LinkedIn that were federally qualified health centers. And so I just hit, I had uploaded my resume or my CV to LinkedIn, and I just clicked on the apply for this job button. Never heard back from either one of the jobs. So I thought, okay, well, that must not be the way to really apply for a job, because I hadn't really been out in the job market for years. So I thought, okay, next time I see a job that interests me, I'm going to try to network into that company and get in touch with somebody who really works there rather than just anonymously sending a CV to a recruiter. So fine, life moves along. And again, I had clicked that link in September or October. In February, I get a call or an email from a recruiter that said, in the past, you had indicated interest in this job at a federally qualified health center in Kansas City. Are you still interested? And I was like, wow, I mean, that was 6 months ago. Well, it turns out that they had lost their CEO and they decided they wanted to replace their CEO before they got a chief medical officer. But what a God thing. I had totally forgotten about the job. I had moved on. I was thinking about other things. I had been on some other interviews. And all of a sudden, this comes back to me, totally without me really doing anything. And so I felt like I just had to explore it. And it has just, from the beginning, been the perfect fit. So I don't know that it was me finding my halftime calling. I think it was God putting it in front of me.
So how did you know? I mean, what convinced you? What thought process did you go through to filter and say, yeah, this is a God thing?
Well, first of all, it fits my halftime mission statement, right? It also, look, I'm a very logical person, the science and all of that. It just is a perfect fit in every way, except perhaps for the fact that my husband's not sure he wants to move. But in every other way, it's really a perfect fit. I'm from Iowa. I've always wanted to come back to the Midwest, Kansas City, Missouri. I've always wanted to work with, I've always worked with underserved populations. And I like a challenge in my work. Well, I was used to leading a group that was pediatric only, but at a federally qualified health center, you work across the age spectrum. So I now supervise dentists and family medicine people and women's health providers. And so I'm learning whole new aspects of leadership, and there's as you can imagine, we get federal money. There's tons of federal regulations. I'm learning all of that. And yet it's in a much smaller organization. So we serve 25,000 unique patients at this health center, and it's smaller satellites as opposed to the 100,000 patients I was taking care of before. So it also gives me really good work-life balance that's very different than what I had in Dallas. And the leadership team is a much more supportive and cohesive leadership team as opposed to a competitive leadership team. So there's just so much about it that is a perfect fit for me. And again, I consider that a gift from God.
God's plan is better than our plan.
Absolutely. Amen.
Well, let me take a brief break in the flow just a minute. We have a poll, and let's kind of see where others are on finding their calling. And it looks like, LeAnn, we have about 50% of our group who is engaging in low-cost probes to identify their calling. And just below that is I'm fully engaged in my calling. And so what would you say, LeAnn, just to people who are maybe just getting started in that process and they're doing the low-cost probes, people like me? What would you say?
Well, I would say explore every opportunity, and don't write something off. One of the first, so I mentioned that I had interviewed at a couple of other places. The first one that I interviewed at, both of those actually, the recruiters for those positions reached out to me. And the first one was to lead a primary care group, which, that's a primary care all pediatric group, which was what, I was doing. But it was in New Orleans. And my initial reaction, and I apologize if there's anybody on here who is madly in love with or lives in New Orleans, but my first reaction was, no, I don't want to go to New Orleans. And then one morning, I walk in my neighborhood in the mornings. And one morning I was walking in my neighborhood and kind of praying about this. And I thought, Lord, this is an opportunity, but New Orleans has no appeal to me. None at all. And, it just seems like it's just Sin City in my mind. And, it was almost like an audible voice, not quite that much, but it was like, well, Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh either, did he?
Ooh.
And I went, oh, okay. So I went to Nineveh and interviewed, but, it just really became clear over time that wasn't where God was calling me. But I think that was a part of the process of saying, Lord, I'm willing. Now, my husband flat told me he was not moving to New Orleans. So But, I was kind of like, okay, Lord, I'm willing. I'm not necessarily excited, but I'm willing. And, I guess maybe he just needed to hear me say I'm willing. But that really wasn't where he was calling me. But I would encourage others to be open to exploring even things that don't initially sound like or feel like a fit, because you learn something from that. And that's the whole, I considered my interview process to be low-cost probes. And so you learn things.
So I think what I'm hearing is, even though it might be messy, if we just get down on our knees, we'll see maybe what the next step is, and we just need to have the faith to take that next step, even if it turns out to be Nineveh.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, for the sake of our schedule, that we like to keep these at 30 minutes, we do the switch over to the questions and answers at this point. So what I would encourage you, and again, we'll touch back on the polls and see if those have changed, but if anybody has a question for LeAnn, now is the time to get it asked. It looks like we've got at least one right now, LeAnn, and so we'll jump into those questions. I'm going to start with the poll and just see if anybody has added to it. It looks like low-cost probes are still in the lead, so we'll kind of stay focused there, because again, these webinars are about our audience and who's listening. Mm-hmm. So we appreciate that input. That helps us direct the questions. Now, those of you that have to leave, we understand it is the bottom of the hour. We're trying to keep these to 30 minutes. If you need to leave, just understand these. First, we appreciate you coming. It is just wonderful that you're here. Take advantage of these stories. You'll also get a link when it's over to the replay and any of the resources that LeAnn has shared. We'll also have links to our Facebook group and links coming up on our next webinar. So if you have to leave, please leave, and we enjoyed it, and we thank you for coming. For those that can stay, we're going to jump into the questions now. LeAnn, does that timing work for you?
Absolutely.
All right. So I will go through our first question. The first question is from Mike. And Mike asks, how specifically did your halftime journey help with you with specific steps in finding your mission field? How did you do the fellows program, or were you in a halftime roundtable?
No, I did the fellows program, and I started the fellows program in October of 2017. And as I said, I could tell that my job was probably, I was very unhappy and very stressed in my job. I didn't know at that time that my practices were going to be sold, but I knew I probably needed to make a transition. The pressure was really intense, and so I was looking for what's next. And again, the tagline of halftime, how to move from success to significance, just really grabbed me. And then, of course, Rhonda Kelbeck being involved, just took it over the top. But so I joined the fellows program, and really just, things like looking at your strengths and talking that through with Carolyn, my coach, and having her talk through with me, how those strengths can be my best friend and how they can also be my worst enemy, and thinking about what I need to be careful of. And, my number one strength is responsibility. And so even just in looking at the size and scope of my role, like being in this smaller organization makes it much more comfortable for me, because I'm so responsible that I was killing myself trying to get everything done in the much bigger organization. So the smaller organization is a better fit, because I can be more responsible and, keep those balls in the air, if that makes sense. So the program really just helped solidify my calling and the fit, the thing that's the best fit for me.
So essentially, did you have a new filter in which to evaluate?
I think, yes, I think so. And my cohort was part of that filter, and they were really great at just encouraging me as I was going through this really difficult time. I mean, and I attended the halftime forum the first year they had it, while I was enrolled in the program. And like, I had to leave the forum to go to one of my practices to tell them they were losing their jobs, right? And just having half-timers around me that day as I was telling them, I met with Carolyn and told her, I'm going to have to go tell people they're losing their jobs, or maybe they're not losing their jobs, but they don't get to go where they want to go. And just the support that my cohort and my coach and Rhonda and everybody in halftime gave to me through that was really, really fabulous. And then just some of the practices that they recommend, like the silent retreats, that I had never really thought about doing and have found to be really powerful as I was just walking through this transition period in my life.
Yeah, the silent retreats are absolutely awesome.
Yes.
It did not have that practice before halftime. And as you mentioned with the cohorts, or as Mike asked about with the round table, you develop a whole new group of friends, of like-minded people that really form a bond that's lifelong.
Right. Well, and as I was going different places to interview, I would email the people in my cohort and ask for their prayers. And you're right. It's a special bond and a special connection that I hope we maintain always.
Yeah, I was fortunate on Sunday, actually, to meet with the biggest part of our group. We were all ended up at the same city on vacation, or most of us. So that's a God thing for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, that was a great question. Our next question is, all right. So, LeAnn, can you talk about what it means for you to model Christian leadership to your staff? What does it look like in your context?
Well, I think just always putting forth before people that we're going to do the right thing, even if it's not the easy thing. And in particular, I think I had a group of my core leaders that we were doing leadership development with. And I talked to them about, you have to have a strong core set of values as an individual that you bring to work with you every day and that you don't compromise. And you have to know why it is that you're doing the work that you're doing. And I talked to them about, hey, I do the work that I do to serve God. That may not be what it is for you, but that's what it is for me. And so whether they were believers or not believers, they knew that that was who I am and why I'm here. And I think what I saw over time, was that it gave them a level of trust in me that I was going to be trying to do the right thing for them and for their patients, even if it wasn't the easy thing.
Well, it sounds like you were a predictable person to work for. And I know every manager would like his employees to be able to anticipate what the decision would be. And you had values, and they knew that your values, and that made it easier probably to do what they felt like you would want them to do.
Right. And when I had to tell them that, that their jobs were, or that the company was coming to an end, they knew it was as painful for me as it was for them. And we sort of linked arms and walked through it together. And I hosted a brunch at my home and invited all of my doctors and nurse practitioners. And I had never tried to host 70 people in my life before. But, it was just such a special time of, laughing together and crying together and sharing what we were going through together. And again, I just think that my faith allowed me to develop deep relationships with them that helped us go through a very difficult time in all of our lives.
Oh, but wow, what a powerful time that must have been. You certainly have modeled Christian principles with that. Wow.
I hope so. And walking through that without demonstrating that we can walk through this without becoming angry and bitter too. And I do think, like I was so as the president of my division of that company, it made me a vice president of the larger health system. And so it was a big health system. So there were like 50 vice presidents. But I was in a meeting where the individual who had negotiated the contract to sell off my practices was talking about that, about selling off the practices. And I had the opportunity to stand up and say a few things. And I was, I took the high road. I wasn't angry and bitter and et cetera. And by that point, everybody knew that I knew I was losing my job. I could have been very unkind. And I can't tell you how many of those vice presidents reached out to me and said, wow, I don't know if I could have been as gracious as you were in that meeting. And so I think that being a person of faith in a secular environment, you may not have Jesus tattooed on your forehead, but it's an opportunity to just bring him everywhere you go, to every situation.
Unintentionally, you stood out.
Yes, I think I did. And I don't know how many. I think, there are those who knew why I stood out, and there are others who just knew I behaved graciously. But either way, I think I honored the Lord in the way I walked through that situation.
Well, and LeAnn, I don't think this is unusual in the medical environment right now. So there may be actually others watching that are somewhere in that process. So,
well, certainly, mergers and acquisitions are the name of the game in business today. So whether you're in healthcare or not, you may have had to walk through this. And in fact, one of the members of my cohort works for a large company that's in a very different industry, but she was really invaluable to me, calling me and walking me through some of her experiences in having to tell employees that they were being, let go or acquired or whatever. So that was another way that my halftime cohort was really valuable to me as I walked through all of that.
Well, I said it for a reason, because at our roundtable impromptu meeting that we had just recently, one of our roundtable members is a physician and is going through exactly the same thing and hasn't yet had to let people go, but the threat has been thrown out. And I mean, it's just, it's amazing. Your story reads on a lot of the things we're all experiencing. Well, we have one more question, unless somebody else submits one. And again, I would encourage you, while we've got LeAnn here, to please write in your question and ask a question. And then otherwise, LeAnn, we will do this last question and let you get back to work. So our last question, or at least our last one at the moment, Halftime always has said this journey is a head and heart journey. Was it a journey for both of you? And if so, how?
Okay, so I think the question is it both head and heart? And yes, so. It absolutely has been. My heart was broken over the loss of those practices and the blood, sweat, and tears that I and all my colleagues had poured into that. I understood why the decision was made by our health system. It was a financial decision, and in business today, that's what it's all about, but my heart was broken over that. But now I'm really filled with great joy at having the opportunity to be in this new setting with a wonderful group of colleagues, and to get the opportunity to build those same kinds of relationships that I had back in Dallas with my my provider team and the entire team, really. And so, as I said, it's been messy, but and everything about this job and this city and where I am now is like, it makes perfect sense to the logical person in me as well. So yes, it absolutely has been a head journey and a heart journey. And, for those of you who are newer in this whole halftime process, don't let them kid you that this is over in a year. I mean, this journey is not a year-long journey. It's a lifelong journey, but you're building, you're kind of putting the tools in your toolbox during the year that you're doing, that are, at least for me, in the fellowship program. I was just putting tools in my toolbox to take with me on the journey going forward. And, building those relationships with my cohort to take forward as well.
Well, the cool thing about it is you don't do it alone.
No, you don't. Absolutely don't.
You have a small group of like-minded individuals that can really help you.
Yes.
Well, I'll touch on that just briefly. We have at least three different types of groups that Halftime does. There's a newly started virtual cohorts, which is very much like what LeAnn and I were doing right now, that you can do over, live streaming. There is also the Dallas cohorts, which is a much more involved one-on-one type of coaching. And then there's also the roundtables, which are done in the southeastern states. And these are a group of like-minded individuals in the Southeast that kind of get together. So if you want to learn more information about these groups, actually, if we can just, looks like Dominique has put it up there on the sites. There's our link to halftime.org, and you can learn more information. So LeAnn, that was the last of our questions. So I think we can kind of wrap things up at this point. What I think I'm hearing, though, is, and seeing in our polls, the vast majority of our group are really still in the low-cost probes stage. And so as we wrap things up, are there any final comments that you might kind of summarize for those that haven't quite made the transition to where it's no longer a low-cost probe and they feel like it's a calling, but they might actually be frustrated that the low-cost probes haven't yielded a clear picture?
Well, I guess I would remind people that God's ways are not our ways, and his timing is not our timing. And there may be a reason that you haven't found your calling yet, and that's because it's not God's timing. And so, I am not a patient person. I'm a get things done person. And, waiting to see what's next was really hard for me. But it gave me some time to rest and to refresh. And again, that wasn't necessarily comfortable for me, but that may be part of the process. And so maybe this, ask God what he wants you to do with this time of uncertainty. And that may be, draw closer to him and trust him more. That may be wait because he's got something perfect, but it's not ready to reveal to you yet. Or it may be just rest while you're in this season, even if it's not uncomfortable. Because I think most half-timers are pretty go-get-em kind of people. And, but God's a God who values rest. He rested himself after creating the world, and he's God. So we have to rest too.
So ask God for more clarity during this time of uncertainty. Yes,
absolutely.
Wow, that is powerful stuff, LeAnn. I appreciate that. And thank you so much. How's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So as you and Dominique have learned in the process of getting ready for this, I'm not perfect at responding to my personal emails. So I've asked that you connect with me through Rhonda Kelbeck at Halftime, and she's willing to kind of be a little bit of a filter to make sure that I don't miss things. Because if you want to ask me a question or connect with me, I don't want to miss you. And so Rhonda is going to be kind of the recipient. I think there's a button on the screen right now. I don't know how that works.
Right there in the center.
Yeah. So you can click that, and that will actually, I think, take you to Rhonda Kelbeck's email, and then she can help you get in touch with me. And I don't know what's available afterwards, but again, I think most of us who are involved with Halftime know Rhonda. So Rhonda's your gateway.
Well, that's perfect. Well, so thank you for everybody that has joined us today. LeAnn, thank you for taking this much time to share with us your journey. It's been fantastic. It's been inspiring, and I just appreciate it so much.
Well, you are most welcome.
And our next webinar will be in August, and this will be Lloyd Reeb on your second half tribe. And you were talking about cohorts, so that's really a lot along the same thing, LeAnn. It's the people you need around you to finish well. And this will be Thursday, August 15th at 9:30. And this webinar is fully recorded. A link will be sent out to everybody that has registered, and you'll be able to forward this the webinar to others that you might want to watch that you think could get benefit from it. And also we'll have a link to the Facebook group. So with that, LeAnn, thank you. Everybody at Halftime, we thank you. I guess we really need to say thank you to Rhonda Kelbeck especially.
Yes, absolutely. Because I don't know, I mean, maybe nobody wants to contact me, but I hope I didn't just flood Rhonda's email inbox, because I'm sure she has other things to do.
Well, Rhonda is a wonderful coach, and Halftime has a lot of great coaches, but I will have to say I enjoy my time with Rhonda especially well. So we appreciate your time very much. Thank you for attending our Halftime Alumni webinars, and we will see you in about 8 more weeks for another Halftime Alumni webinar. And again, in about 2 or 3 more weeks, we have the one with Lloyd Reeb. So bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, LeAnn. Bye-bye.